One of the major parts of Anthem is, well, destroying your enemies. You do this by piloting one of 4 Iron Man exosuits called Javelins. Each Javelin functions differently to the others by having completely different weapon systems and abilities that they can use. So today, we're going to take a look at these Javelins and all their skills to give you a good idea of what Javelin you'd like to main. Keep in mind, you can pick another suit and completely customize and personalize before a mission, but using one type increases the chances of sweet loot dropping specifically for that Javelin. Think Diablo 3 with its loot system. So each Javelin has 3 ability slots, and equipping gear into a slot gives a specific ability for you to use. For example, the Colossus has a firewall mortar item. He needs to equip that in his Ordnance launcher gear slot, and the item has its own stats and rarity. Follow the link below for more information on items. Suffice to say, they make a huge impact to the abilities. All the information is from live streams and footage of the game, so let's get right into the first Javelin, the Ranger. It's the suit you start with, and it's the easiest to pick up and understand. It can wield every weapon type except for heavy weapons. It's heavily armored, so it takes no fall damage, which is forgiving to new players overheating mid-air and falling to the ground. It has a variety in its offensive systems, letting it deal high single target damage, high area of effect damage, good crowd control, and the ability to prime and detonate combos on its own. While this is said to be the jack of all trades Javelin, that's not entirely accurate. It's just the most flexible. However, it will be one of the best boss killing Javelins because of its versatility and because of its combos. Detonating a combo in the Ranger deals high single target damage, which is great for taking down big, powerful enemies. So let's get into its abilities. The first slot is the Grenade Gear slot. The name says it all. The abilities you can have on this slot revolve around different kinds of grenades. Grenades have low range as you have to throw them, but they generally deal high damage. First up is the Frag Grenade. We should all know what this one does. It explodes, dealing damage to every enemy within the blast radius. You start with this ability, and it's the Ranger's largest area of effect damage skills, being able to take out a large amount of enemies clumped together and doing some impressive damage. This ability is good for taking out smaller and less threatening enemies so you can focus on the big boys. The Frag Grenade also has the fortunate side effect of detonating enemies who have been primed, setting off the Ranger's powerful combo effect. Next up is the Inferno Grenade. Now this one lights a moderate area on fire, dealing damage over time to those who remain in it. Those who remain in it also have a chance to be ignited based on its fire status statistic. Whew, bit of a tongue twister. Ignited enemies take damage over time and are primed to be comboed. That means that if any player hits that enemy with a detonator ability, like the aforementioned Frag Grenade, they will get a combo. This ability is good for multiple purposes. It can do extreme damage to enemies funneled in a choke point, letting you crowd control a bunch of small enemies while your team deals with the big ones, or it can be placed on strong, slower enemies to really start racking up the damage and letting you or your friends get off powerful combos. Next up is the Frost Grenade, which damages and freezes enemies in place based on its frost status statistic, meaning most likely stronger enemies won't be frozen for long or frozen at all if the stat isn't high enough. Frozen enemies will be primed for a combo. This is your specialized crowd control grenade. You use this to start a fight, to get off some combos and control the field, or during a fight to alleviate some of the damage coming out for your team. If you get this off at the start of a choke point, since the enemies freeze, more of them will catch up to the frozen ones and clump up, becoming easy to take out with area of effect attacks. Next is the Seeker Grenade. It functions like a cluster grenade does in other games, except the clusters home in on the nearest target. This is almost single target, but the munitions will continue to the next target if the first one dies. If you always want to hit your target, the Seeker Grenade is for you, and is perfect for those fast, slippery enemies. It's unsure right now if this ability detonates primed targets. Last is a Sticky Bomb, and it's the highest damage dealing grenade to a single target. It doesn't seek out targets, it explodes where it lands, so you have to have good aim. This grenade is, like you'd expect, excellent for taking down high value targets or low value targets, but why bother doing that? This will most likely detonate primed targets, and together with the Ranger's high damage combo, the Sticky Grenade will deal massive damage very quickly, great for bosses or armored enemies. So that's it for the Grenade Gear slot. Next up is the Assault Launcher Gear slot. This slot is all about, well, shooting things at your enemies instead of throwing them. First up is the homing missile, which does what you'd think, sends out a missile that homes in on a target and explodes for low area of effect damage, but the cooldown seems to be short. You start with this skill along with the frag grenade. Like the frag grenade, the homing missile also detonates primed targets. You don't need to have a primer and detonator equipped to be effective. In this case, the frag and the missile work well together, as one is good area of effect damage and one seeks out faster targets and has more range. Next up is the energy pulse. It blasts a single target with a kinetic wave of force. This does high single target damage and may or may not detonate the target. This, like the sticky bomb, is your priority target killer. Combining both would mean you can deal with a single target with ease, but would also be unable to combo on your own. Next up is the Spark Beam. It lets you channel a beam of energy for continuous damage. We're unsure of the duration or the damage, and there's been very little on this skill, but I imagine it would require you to be stationary and focus on your targets to deal as much damage as you can. That would mean it would need to do a fair amount of damage, or the energy pulse will be strictly better. Next up is Venom Darts, which shoots a volley of acid-infused darts that seek out the target. It's unclear right now how acid damage works, but my assumption is it works similar to fire, in that the item will have an acid status statistic that governs if the enemy will be affected by acid. Acid enemies would be primed for combo and possibly have reduced armor or take damage over time. Assuming this is all correct, that would make Venom Darts especially powerful against bosses for obvious reasons. Using a combination of Venom Darts and Sticky Bomb would make short work of any single target as they combo together. Next up is Blast Missile, which fires a missile that explodes for moderate area of effect damage. Now this is a bigger version of homing missile that doesn't seek out targets. Whiffing an ability can be costly though, so you trade reliability for damage and area of effect size. Think of this as a longer range frag grenade that you can't throw in an arc. So that's it for the assault launcher gear abilities. Next is the support gear. First up is the Bulwark Point, which deploys a spherical field that deflects incoming projectiles for a short time. This is your defensive support ability, alleviating the damage coming to your team during a particularly hard mission or objective. Last is Muster Point, which creates a field that increases weapon damage for teammates who enter its radius. This is if your team isn't having trouble surviving, but could use an extra boost in damage in situations. This is good to use while leveling and wanting to get through content on easier difficulties, as it will speed it up. So that's it for support systems. All Javelins have melee weapons though, and the Ranger's is the Shock Mace. It hits for moderate damage to single targets, unless aerial, in which it smashes down for an area of effect attack. The Ranger's ultimate ability starts off by targeting enemies in front of it with crosshairs. After a short time, a large salvo of missiles are fired, hitting those targets. If there are less enemies, then they will be hit with multiple missiles. This ultimate is true to the nature of the Ranger, adaptable. It can do extremely high damage to single targets or hit multiple fast enemies. In conclusion, the Ranger is versatile and useful in every situation. It can build to be an effective single target boss killing monster, build to effectively control crowds, or it can do a bit of everything. That being said, the gear you can get could drastically change how you play, as masterwork and legendary quality weapons have powerful effects that modify them. A masterwork quality assault launcher slot item called Argo's Mace gives the blast missile ability, but it detonates an electric explosion when you defeat an enemy, letting it do further area of effect damage as elemental. Perhaps with that, you'd want to shoot for more crowd control elemental builds. Now let's move on to the Colossus. The Colossus is your tank in the literal sense. It has heavy armor and a huge cannon. It's not as maneuverable as the Ranger and isn't as nimble on the battlefield, but it doesn't need to be, as it can deploy a shield to absorb incoming damage. It can't equip the smallest weapon types like pistols and SMGs, but it's the only Javelin that can equip the big boy weapons like grenade launchers and a minigun. As it's heavily armored, it won't take fall damage and even does damage to those it lands on. By detonating a combo with the Colossus, you set off an area of effect explosion, which is different to the high damage single target combo you get using the Ranger. The Colossus is new player friendly like the Ranger and has a lot of powerful area of effect attacks, making it perfect for clearing out rabble and keeping them off your team. The first gear slot for the Colossus is the Ordnance launcher. This slot is all about setting off attacks from a shoulder mounted weapon. First up is the high explosive mortar, which launches a single explosive projectile that obeys the laws of gravity and hits for a large amount of damage in a wide area of effect. You start with this ability and it's the second largest area of effect attack that you have. This is for those who want to fire something off and get right back to pumping them full of lead. It detonates combos so it can be held until the absolute perfect time to hit multiple primed opponents. Next up is the Burst Mortar, which fires off multiple small mortars that spread out and hit a larger area than the High Explosive Mortar. It's the largest area of effect ability the Colossus has. They don't quite hit as hard, but this is perfect for clearing out massive waves of enemies, especially if they've been primed, as this ability detonates combos. Your combos set off more AoE damage, so this attack, although slightly longer to get off, is one of the best for clearing out lots of small enemies. Next up is the Firewall Mortar. It creates a wall of flame where it lands that does a lot of damage to those within it and has a chance of setting them alight based on its fire status statistic. Those caught on fire are primed and can be detonated by other players' high explosive mortar, for example. The firewall is great for locking down areas like a tunnel that has enemies pouring through it, or to pile on extra damage on a large boss that will stand in the flames and take major damage. It won't be good against smaller, faster enemies unless you place it tactically or another teammate freezes them, like a storm for example. Next is the Lightning Coil, which strikes a single random target with a bolt of lightning from your Tesla coil type shoulder mounting. It prioritizes targets that have status effects, which leads me to believe this attack will detonate primed targets. If so, this will be your go-to single target damage dealing Ordnance launcher gear ability. Good against priority targets and bosses. Next is the Shock Coil, which emits waves of electricity out from the Colossus, hitting enemies in an area around it. Think Nova spells from Diablo. This is the ability you run if you're building the Colossus into, well, a close range bruiser. It helps you clear out enemies around you when you taunt or get overwhelmed. It's unclear if it primes or detonates, but either one would only make it better. It goes without saying that if you don't plan on getting close to your enemies, this skill won't be as useful. So that does it for the Ordnance launcher slot. Next is the Heavy Assault launcher slot, which is all about shooting dangerous things at your enemies. First up is a heavy cannon. Using a cannon, you fire a large single rocket at your enemies that explodes for good damage in a moderate area. This detonates prime targets and has more range than the Ordnance attacks. This would work well with the Firewall Mortar, clearing out enemies but still dealing high damage to priority targets, as well as setting off combos without the help of your team. Next is the Flamethrower, which is pretty self-explanatory, a close-range spray of hot plasma all over the faces of your unlucky enemies. It deals high damage and has a chance to light enemies on fire based on the item's fire status statistic, which primes them for detonation. This is another up-close ability, perfect if you're building your Colossus to be a bruiser. If the Shock Coil detonates prime targets, then naturally the Flamethrower and Shock Coil would be a match made in heaven for such a bruiser type build. Next is the Flak Cannon, which barrages nearby enemies with short-range projectiles in an arc. Flak cannons were developed as an anti-air weapon, but these are modified for all purposes. Think of this attack as a kind of shotgun effect. Not much else is known, like if it will detonate combos, but from what we know, it will be a great close to medium range option. The Railgun is next, and it's your high damage single target option in the Assault Launcher slot. It hits the enemy with a long range, precise, kinetic round, which also detonates primed targets. Combine this with the Firewall Mortar and you have a kit especially good at killing high value targets at range, but can still deal with small minions. The Colossus never really loses its ability to deal with groups, as even its regular melee attack hits with a Nova around it. If you combine the Railgun and the Lightning Coil or Explosive Mortar, you have a consistent and reliable form of damage. Last is the Acid Spitter, and it's not my ex. It expels an acid projectile onto enemies, yeah, it still sounds like my ex, but this one primes the target based on an acid status statistic on the item. This would make it your ranged combo priming option in the Assault Launcher slot. It would also combo well with the High Explosive Mortar and Burst Mortar, as they are abilities you wouldn't need a teammate to combo with. So that does it for the Assault Launcher gear slot. Next is the Support gear slot. Taunt is up first, and it forces all enemies within a radius to divert their attacks to the Colossus. This is a way of stopping heavy damage from wiping your group, as you're able to taunt and get out your shield to absorb almost all of it. This requires you to be up close, so taunting build would work well with the Shock Coil, Flak Cannon, and Flamethrower. Last is the Deflector Pulse, which gives all nearby allies a damage resistance buff. Both support abilities are about reducing damage to your team, but this one can be used while you're at range, so it doesn't require to get up close. However, it doesn't stop your team from being hit, so this isn't as strong as protecting them with your taunt in most cases. So that's it for the support gear. We briefly mentioned the Colossus melee. It's quite simply the large fists of the Colossus, in which the pilot smashes to the ground to deal high area of effect melee damage. The Colossus ultimate ability has it taking out a massive siege cannon and firing off up to 3 powerful projectiles that explode in a way similar to a small nuclear explosion. It does extreme damage and hits in a fairly large area of effect. This is another great ability for clearing out a lot of enemies. In conclusion, the Colossus is all about brute force. They are perfect for mitigating damage and dealing a lot of it in an area of effect. Even when specialized in single target, they have their melee and combos which hit in an area. The Colossus is perfect at dealing with a lot of enemies at once and keeping themselves and their team alive. Just don't expect them to do any fancy maneuvers. So that does it for the Colossus. Now let's take a look at the Interceptor. The Interceptor is lightly armored, so it will take fall damage and die faster than the Colossus or the Ranger, but it's the most agile out of all the Javelins. Think Rogue in traditional RPGs. It's great at getting close and dealing out extreme damage to single targets and dashing out, or hitting targets from range while dodging incoming damage. Its melee attacks chain to each other, and it can equip all weapon types except heavy weapons. The Interceptor is a little different to the other 3 Javelins when it comes to combos. When the Javelin gets a combo, it gains an aura of the effect that was primed on its target. So if the target was primed with fire and the Interceptor detonates it, it will gain a fire aura for the duration, encouraging it to get up close. We've seen very little when it comes to the Interceptor, so some abilities need some speculation. The first slot is Assault Systems, and it's about offensive skills that don't have a clear theme. Its first skill is the Seeker Glaive. It throws out a sharp projectile that seeks out the nearest target. It deals high damage to a single target and doesn't require amazing precision. It's unclear if it detonates combos, but it seems unlikely. Next up is the Acid Bomb, which throws a bomb that explodes, splashing enemies with acid in a moderate area of effect. It will most likely prime the target based on the acid status statistic on the item, letting them be comboed by other abilities. I'm surprised to find the Ranger didn't get this option, but acid seems like a powerful effect. Next is the Cryo Glaive. It launches a projectile that does damage and can freeze on impact based on its frost status statistic. Frozen targets are primed for detonation, which is particularly good against priority targets, and I imagine it would naturally have a high chance to freeze. Next is the Cluster Mine, which throws out a group of mines into an area, locking it down until enemies walk over them. As the mines wait to be activated, this ability can be used in combination with your team. A Colossus, for example, can taunt enemies and drag them back into a group of mines you have laid. They will most likely detonate combos too, so this on top of a firewall would be massively effective. Last is Spark Dash, which has your Interceptor dashing forward, leaving behind a trail of damaging electricity. This is the Interceptor's melee option, letting it be more maneuverable when dealing extra damage to enemies. If you want to build the Interceptor as an up-close melee rogue, you might consider picking up this skill. So that's it for the Assault System slot. Next is the Strike System slot, which also doesn't have a clear theme. First up is Star Strike, which charges an enemy with energy that explodes after a short delay. If that target is destroyed before the full delay, the explosion deals increased damage. Now this is a melee strike that results in an area of effect payoff. If it detonates combos, which is looking likely, it would be the perfect combination with Acid Bomb, as you can approach the group, throw a bomb, use your extra maneuverability to get in and quickly Star Strike to explode the group. The stragglers will have to deal with your acid aura and powerful melee. Next is the Plasma Star, which tosses a plasma-empowered shuriken at the target, which is effective at long range. It seems like this ability has a minuscule cooldown, so it can be spammed as a pseudo replacement to your gun. I expect most of the Interceptor abilities have a very low cooldown in order to lower your reliance on guns. Expect this to do higher damage as its single target, and expect interesting effects with Masterwork gear. Combining this with Seeker Glaive makes the Interceptor great at range, not relying on combos, but just doing consistent single target damage. Next is Nova Strike, which sends out a projection of your Interceptor, which attacks enemies it comes in contact with. We have yet to see this in practice, so it's unsure if the projection will stay out and attack those enemies that come close, like a area denial ability, or will simply travel in a line like a wave of damage. Either way, this is one way to do your melee damage at range, so gear that boosts your melee output would still get use out of this ability. Tempest Strike is next, which is a devastating single target attack that can stun smaller enemies. This is a melee range attack, so it'll work well with Spark Dash, which gets you in close and then gets you out of trouble if you Tempest Strike the priority target. It's unclear if this will detonate primed targets, but if it does, it would be good with Cairo Glaive, as you could freeze the priority target, use your agility to get in close, and Tempest Strike to combo, dealing massive damage and giving you a freezing aura to control the rest of the enemies around you. Last is Corrosive Spray, which sprays a jet of corrosive acid that damages all enemies hit. It seems like a close-range flamethrower-like attack, but instead of fire, it primes the target with acid based on the acid status statistic of the item. There doesn't seem to be good assault system abilities to combo with it, but having Spark Dash would let you get in quickly to spray your enemies with your acid fluids and then dash out. Hit and run, spray and pray, which suits the Interceptor's kit very well, letting your teammates combo while you target down another group. So that's it for the strike systems. Now let's cover the support systems. First up is the target beacon, which marks a target for increased damage. It jumps to another enemy if the marked target is destroyed. This skill lets you focus your team's damage output. It's especially useful against priority targets, just like most of the Interceptor's kit, and helps it direct its damage without use of voice comms. You might want to take over the role of group leader with this ability. The last ability is Rally Cry, which removes all the status effects from nearby allies. This seems highly situational, but if you know you're fighting a particularly hard group or boss that uses statuses like fire, bring along this and it could mean your team survives. There's no point being able to do extra damage if your team is dead. So that's it for the support systems, but what about the rest of the Interceptor's kit? First, like I mentioned, the Interceptor's melee is quite powerful. Its double-bladed daggers hit single targets for high damage while chaining together for continuous use until you stop mashing the button. The Interceptor's ultimate keeps this theme going. It charges up the suit and goes into a mode that makes it invulnerable to damage and deals extreme melee damage at high speeds. You'll be jumping and flipping around and dispatching enemies with ease over a short duration. In conclusion, the Interceptor is a fast, guerrilla warfare javelin with a focus on high damage, single target close range attacks. At some point with this javelin, you'll have to get in close, be it to get off an ability, melee, utilize your combo effect, or use your ultimate. Having low armor and relying on when to get in and when to leave means this javelin has the highest skill cap out of all four of the javelins, but also has the potential to be lethal in the hands of a master. If you have a tactical, fast and deadly playstyle, or play the rogue in RPGs, the Interceptor is for you. The final javelin is the Storm. The Storm uses seals to boost kinetic powers of the Lancer to, well, look, it's the mage, okay? It casts spells using science. The Storm can use all weapon types except the big heavy types like miniguns. The Storm uses light armor like the Interceptor and can also, by far, spend the most time airborne in combat. The ideal situation for the Storm is to hover above the fight, raining lightning, fire, and frost down upon its enemies, causing massive damage and priming combos. Its combo effect spreads the primed target's elemental effect to others, so if it was burning, it will spread to the other targets, letting you and your team further combo. It's not as agile as the Interceptor, so keep it at a safe distance. So let's take a look at the first ability slot, Blast Seals, which focuses around explosive elemental attacks, almost all of them priming the targets for combos. First up is the Lightning Strike, which summons a bolt that does lightning damage in a moderate area of effect. You control where it lands, it detonates prime targets, and is just a good all-around damage ability. Next is Ice Storm, which creates a field of ice that deals damage, rapidly building to a final explosion of frost. This is a good area denial ability to drop on a choke point or on a large slow boss. It has a chance of freezing targets based on the item's frost status statistic, priming them for a combo. If they get frozen, they will most likely be hit by the final explosion, which does the majority of the damage. Next is Flame Burst, which sets off a fire explosion at the target location. Similar effect to the Lightning Strike, except this attack can catch enemies on fire based on the fire status statistic, priming them for a combo. Next is Rime Blast, which sends out a flurry of ice projectiles that deal damage and freeze close-range targets. This is your close-range option that freezes based on your frost status statistic on the item, setting them up for combos. Generally, the storm doesn't like enemies getting up close, so having a tool to control them when they do definitely can't hurt. Finally, we have Living Flame, which sends out a burst of plasma that seeks targets, explodes and ignites them based on the item's stat. Unlike the other Blast Seal abilities, this one will home in on the enemy, making it good for those who don't want to waste their time lining up and missing targets. It's not as if this is a placed area of effect attack like Flame Burst, so expect it to do more damage or have a lower cooldown. So that's it for the Blast Seal slot. Next up is the Focus Seals, which are your less explosive types of elemental attacks. Hoarfrost Shards, which lets you rapidly fire shards of ice that slowly freeze your targets in place. It seems to be able to be spammed with a low cooldown, so if this is slotted, expect to use it in order to freeze targets, which will prime them for your Lightning Strike. The frozen targets when comboed with the strike will spread the freeze effect to enemies around it, being extremely useful for crowd control. Next is Fireball, which fires small balls of fire at the enemy. This is similar to Hoarfrost Shards in that it can be spammed, but it can also be charged for a larger plasma projectile that explodes. Keep in mind that every one of these attacks comes with it a chance to catch the enemy on fire, so charging the attack so it explodes for AoE could potentially light a group of enemies on fire, letting you hit them with Lightning Strike to spread the effect further. You could also combine this with Living Flame or Flame Burst to become the Master of Flame, letting you spread fire around to all enemies you see, letting your group get off frequent and powerful combos, dealing a lot of damage over time, which is especially good for priority targets. I expect you would need to seek gear that helps you out with elemental damage if this is the path that you take. Next up is Ball Lightning, which has you throwing a ball of electricity that bounces off targets and walls and does high damage. It can electrically charge enemies based on the gear's stat, priming them for combos, so naturally it will work very well with Lightning Strike, and since it can bounce, it's also useful for hitting enemies behind cover. But this is a high skill cap ability, requiring practice to land and bounce correctly. Next is Glacial Beam, which fires a beam of powerful ice energy in the target direction. This is your accurate, long-range frost damage option. It doesn't explode, it just hits targets it's aimed at. Its cooldown is unknown, so this could be something that's able to be used often like Hoarfrost Shards, or could be a highly damaging single target blast. Either way, this will prime the target with freeze status, meaning it will combo with Lightning Strike. It'll also be good with Ice Storm and Rime Blast to become an ice status focus support type Javelin. Finally, we have Arc Burst, which unleashes a blast of lightning that leaps to nearby targets for heavy damage. Think Chain Lightning in other games. This could very well prime the target or detonate, either effect making the skill more valuable. If it's a detonator, it would work well with every Blast Seal ability except for Lightning Strike. If it's a primer, it would work well with Lightning Strike. Either way, expect this ability to be good if you simply want to unleash damage on your enemies. So that's it for the Focus Seals. Now we move on to the Support Seals. First ability is the Wind Wall, which generates a defensive wall of wind. The wall deflects incoming enemy projectiles, which is what you will most likely be concerned about being at range. This won't help you against those already close to you, but it will keep your team alive when you are being overwhelmed by enemy javelin or projectile-based creatures. The last support ability is Nexus, which creates a field that provides gear cooldown reduction to teammates who enter, meaning those who rely on their abilities will be able to get them off more often. This benefits you highly as well, and it would be better served in fights where you need to unleash the damage and crowd control rather than protect yourself. So that's it for the support seals, but what about the rest of the Javelin? The Storm's melee attack is a fiery strike. It uses the seals on its arm to deliver an explosive punch that knocks back targets, giving the Storm a chance to retreat to a safe distance. Most of the Storm's kit relies on being at a distance, and the melee attack isn't meant to be used often. It's your oh shit button to let you escape. The Storm's ultimate is called Elemental Storm. It hits the target with a Frost Blast, then you can target an Electric Blast, and then finally target a Fire Blast. After all the blasts have been set off, you can activate the ability again to drop meteors on the blast locations. This ultimate is great at clearing mobs and is flexible in nature, so it's always going to be useful. In conclusion, the Storm is not as hard to play as the Interceptor, but still requires some knowledge of positioning. It's lightly armored but powerful, a true glass cannon. It has a lot of attacks that prime targets, meaning this Javelin is a great support to your team, spreading elemental effects and crowd controlling. If you like sitting back, hovering above fights, raining down death and spreading elemental effects, the Storm might be for you. So those are the 4 Javelins and all their skills and abilities. I hope after this you've got an idea of what Javelin you'd like to main come February the 22nd or the 1st for those trying the demo. Also, for those wondering, the devs have stated you can choose to unlock another Javelin within the first hour of playing the game, so you won't have to wait long to pick up your main. So thank you all for watching. Let me know what you're planning to suit up in below in the comments. If you want to chat to me or a group of like-minded individuals, join my Discord and my Twitter. Just being around for these videos supports me tremendously, but if you want to go the extra mile, I just made a Patreon page and supporters will be listed at the end of the video. Thanks for sticking around this long. We have a ton more Anthem content coming in the next few days, so stay tuned to /Dantix. Oh, and if you see anyone commenting something stupid about EA, be sure to reply to them with something like, cool story, bro. Thanks, guys.